Snow was falling on Bourbon Street. Not flurries, not a dusting that melted on contact. 8 inches of accumulation blanketing the French Quarter, piling on wrought iron balconies, covering the cobblestones where jazz bands play and tourists stumble between bars. Residents who had never seen snow in their lives stood in the middle of Canal Street, staring upward as fat flakes descended through the glow of streetlights. Someone had organized an impromptu hockey game. Down the block, a man strapped on skis. This was New Orleans on January 21st, 2025. A city built for hurricanes, for humidity, for the subtropical languor of the Gulf Coast. A city where measurable snow falls perhaps once a decade. A city that had not seen anything like this since 1895. Winter Storm Enzo had arrived, and what it delivered to the Gulf Coast shattered records that had stood for more than a century. Paralyzed infrastructure designed for entirely different kinds of emergencies, claimed at least 13 lives, and produced images so surreal they seemed generated by artificial intelligence rather than atmospheric conditions. Snow on the white sand beaches of Pensacola, snow covering palm trees in Mobile, snow piled on the deck of the USS Alabama at Battleship Memorial Park. The visual evidence of a weather system that violated everything residents of the Deep South understood about where they lived. The numbers tell the story in hard terms. New Orleans recorded 8 inches of snowfall in a single day, obliterating the modern record of 2.7 inches set on New Year's Eve, 1963. Some parts of the metropolitan area saw even more. Chalmette reported 11.5 inches. Near Grand Coteau, Louisiana, snowfall totaled 13.4 inches, the highest measurement from the entire storm. Baton Rouge received 7.6 inches, exceeding its one-day record from February 1895. The storm dropped more snow on New Orleans in a single afternoon than Anchorage, Alaska had received all month. In Florida, measurements that initially seemed impossible were confirmed by National Weather Service observers. Milton, a small town in the Panhandle near the Alabama border, recorded 9.8 inches of snow. The previous state record was 4 inches, set in 1954. Pensacola received 8.9 inches, nearly tripling its all-time record of 3 inches from 1895. These were not marginal increases. These were measurements so far beyond historical precedent that longtime meteorologists struggled to contextualize them. Mobile, Alabama, saw 7.5 inches, breaking its record of 6 inches that had stood since the same 1895 storm. The weight of that snow caused the roof of the Mobile Civic Center to collapse. The building was already slated for demolition, but the storm decided to accelerate the process. City officials confirmed no injuries, though the timing was almost comedic in its symbolism. A building designed for Alabama's climate, finally undone by weather that Alabama's climate was never supposed to produce. Houston experienced its first ever blizzard warning, not a winter storm warning, a blizzard warning, for Houston, Texas, the city where residents complain when temperatures drop below 50 degrees. Beaumont, on the Texas-Louisiana border, set an all-time monthly record low of 11 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature would be unremarkable in Minnesota. On the Gulf Coast, it represented a violation of the natural order. For the first time in recorded history, the National Weather Service issued a blizzard warning for parts of southwestern Louisiana. The warning covered Vermilion, Jefferson Davis, Acadia, Cameron, Lafayette, and Calcasieu parishes due to heavy snowfall and sustained winds exceeding 35 miles per hour. The combination of accumulating snow and high winds created conditions that meet the technical definition of a blizzard. On the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, the meteorological mechanics that produced Enzo were not particularly exotic. An area of low pressure developed in the western Gulf of Mexico along an Arctic cold front on January 20th. It moved eastward and collided with abundant moisture. What made the event historic was the depth of the cold air that had descended from the polar regions. The southern lobe of the polar vortex had extended unusually far south, establishing temperatures 30 to 40 degrees below normal across much of the central and southern United States. When that frigid air mass met the moisture-rich environment of the Gulf Coast, precipitation that would normally fall as rain instead crystallized into snow. The overlap of extreme cold and significant moisture is rare in this region precisely because the Gulf Coast's climate typically prevents Arctic air from reaching so far south. When it does happen, the moisture source is usually insufficient to produce substantial accumulation. Enzo delivered both elements in historic proportions. The human cost was immediate and severe. At least 13 deaths were attributed to the storm and its accompanying cold wave. 5 people died when a tractor-trailer collided with other vehicles on an icy road southwest of San Antonio. 2 people in Austin died of suspected hypothermia. In Dale County, Alabama, a 27-year-old woman was killed when her vehicle crashed on a snow-covered road. In the same county, a 37-year-old man died when his house caught fire after he tried to warm his home by leaving the stove on. A homeless man was found dead in Katy, Texas. 1 person died in Georgia from cold exposure. These deaths reflected a fundamental mismatch between infrastructure and conditions. The Gulf Coast has almost no snow removal equipment. Cities that budget for hurricane response do not purchase snowplows. Road treatment with salt and sand, routine in northern states, is essentially non-existent. Drivers who have never operated vehicles in winter conditions suddenly found themselves navigating ice-covered highways with summer tires and no understanding of how differently cars behave when roads are frozen. Interstate 10, the main east-west artery connecting Houston to New Orleans to Mobile to Jacksonville, was closed for much of its length through Louisiana and the Florida Panhandle. I-510 and I-310 around New Orleans were shut down. All ramps leading to US 90 and elevated bridges were closed. In Florida, the entire stretch of I-10 through the Panhandle was impassable. The transportation network that keeps the Gulf Coast economy moving simply stopped. Both of Houston's major airports, George Bush Intercontinental and William P. Hobby, suspended operations. Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport canceled nearly all flights. Jacksonville International closed. Tallahassee International closed. Mobile Regional closed. Across the region, more than 1,800 flights were canceled, with ripple effects extending through Atlanta, the nation's busiest hub, and onward to the rest of the national aviation system. For the approximately 1,100 people who took shelter in county-run warming centers in Houston, the storm was not a novelty or a source of viral social media content. It was a survival event. Warming centers in New Orleans quickly reached capacity, forcing the city to open a third location. Mobile crisis units worked to transport people to shelter. The homeless population, already vulnerable, faced temperatures that their bodies and their circumstances were utterly unprepared to withstand. At least 77,000 people lost power during the storm, with most outages concentrated in Louisiana and Florida. The power grid along the Gulf Coast is not hardened against prolonged sub-freezing temperatures. Natural gas infrastructure, heating systems, and electrical equipment are designed for a climate where hard freezes are brief anomalies rather than extended events. When temperatures dropped into single digits and stayed there, the system's limitations became apparent. The economic damage was estimated at a minimum of $200 million, though that figure likely understates the full impact. Business closures, supply chain disruptions, agricultural losses, and property damage from frozen pipes all contributed to costs that will take months to fully calculate. The crawfish industry, a significant economic driver for Louisiana, faced questions about whether the cold would damage populations in the bayous. Experts assured worried residents that crawfish can survive by conserving energy and moving little. But the uncertainty itself carried economic weight. Yet alongside the hardship, there was wonder. Residents who had never seen significant snow experienced something genuinely new. Children who had only known snow from television and movies touched it for the first time. Families built snowmen in front yards where such a thing had never been possible. In New Orleans, someone decorated a snowman with Mardi Gras beads on Orleans Avenue in the mid-city neighborhood. Priests and nuns engaged in a snowball fight outside a suburban church. People went sledding down the Mississippi River levees using kayaks and laundry baskets. The images that circulated on social media captured both the disruption and the delight. Snow piling up on beaches where people normally sunbathe. Palm trees bent under the weight of accumulation their fronds were never designed to support. The USS Alabama dusted with white, looking like a ghost ship from another era. Airboats, the swamp vehicles that navigate Louisiana's bayous, being used instead to do donuts in parking lots transformed into snowfields. Thunder snow was reported near Lafayette, a phenomenon rare enough in typical snow country and almost unheard of on the Gulf Coast. The combination of convective activity and frozen precipitation produced lightning and thunder while snow fell at rates approaching an inch per hour. For meteorologists, it was a technical curiosity. For residents experiencing it, the sound of thunder during a snowstorm added another layer of unreality to an already impossible day. The National Weather Service office in Mobile called it an incredible event. Forecasters who had spent careers tracking hurricanes found themselves issuing warnings and monitoring conditions they had only studied in textbooks about northern climates. The novelty for professionals mirrored the novelty for the public. Everyone was experiencing something new. But the novelty masked genuine danger. Black ice formed on roads as temperatures dropped after the snow stopped falling. The sun would melt surface snow during the day, and that water would refreeze after dark, creating invisible hazards on bridges and overpasses. Cities that lacked experience with winter weather also lacked the institutional knowledge to warn residents about these specific risks. Officials begged people to stay home, but many ventured out anyway, drawn by curiosity or necessity. The storm's aftermath extended beyond the immediate recovery. For Louisiana, this was the coldest weather in over 100 years. State climatologist Jay Grimes confirmed that the combination of snow and cold had not been seen since the 1960s, and even that comparison understated how exceptional the event was. Record low temperatures were set across the region. New Iberia dropped to 2 degrees Fahrenheit, breaking a record that had stood since 1948 by 15 degrees. Lafayette hit 4 degrees. Baton Rouge and Lake Charles both recorded 7 degrees. The snowpack refrigeration effect amplified the cold. Fresh snow reflects sunlight during the day while radiating heat away at night. The white blanket covering the Gulf Coast acted like a cooling agent, keeping temperatures suppressed even after the storm system had moved on. Areas that rarely experienced sub-freezing temperatures remained locked in a deep freeze for days, extending the danger to people, property, and infrastructure. Yet, within weeks, the physical evidence of Enzo had largely vanished. By early February, New Orleans was basking in temperatures approaching 80 degrees ahead of hosting the Super Bowl. The whiplash from snow-covered to near-record warmth illustrated the Gulf Coast's typical climate pattern reasserting itself. The storm became a memory, a collection of photographs, a once-in-a-lifetime story to tell. But it also became a data point in an increasingly troubling pattern. The question scientists and emergency managers now face is whether events like Enzo will become more frequent. Climate change does not simply mean warming everywhere all the time. It means disruption of patterns, amplification of extremes, and the increased probability of conditions that were once considered virtually impossible. The polar vortex, which typically keeps Arctic air contained near the pole, has shown increasing instability in recent years. When it weakens or displaces, lobes of frigid air can plunge much farther south than historical norms would predict. The 2025 Gulf Coast blizzard may prove to be an outlier, a freak occurrence that will not repeat for another century. Or it may prove to be a harbinger, an early indication that the region's climate assumptions require fundamental revision. The infrastructure choices made over decades, the building codes designed for heat rather than cold, the emergency management systems optimized for hurricanes, all of these reflect a world where significant winter weather was not considered a realistic threat. If that threat is now real, if events like Enzo could recur with greater frequency, the Gulf Coast faces an adaptation challenge comparable to what coastal communities face from sea level rise. Buildings would need better insulation and heating capacity. Power grids would need hardening against cold as well as heat. Transportation departments would need equipment and expertise currently concentrated in northern states. The region's entire relationship with winter would require reconsideration. For now, that reconsideration remains largely theoretical. The snow has melted, the temperatures have normalized, life along the Gulf Coast has returned to its subtropical baseline. But somewhere in weather archives, the data from January 21, 2025 sits as a reminder of what happened and a warning of what could happen again. 8 inches of snow in New Orleans, nearly 10 inches in Milton, Florida. A blizzard warning for the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. Records that stood for 130 years shattered in a single afternoon. The residents who photographed themselves on Bourbon Street, who built snowmen with Mardi Gras beads, who sledded down levees and played hockey on Canal Street, will remember that day for the rest of their lives. Many of them had never touched snow before. Many of them may never touch it again. For a brief moment, the impossible became real, and the Gulf Coast was transformed into something it had never been. That transformation was temporary. The climate that makes this region what it is, humid, warm, shaped by hurricanes and humidity, reasserted itself within days. But the memory persists. And somewhere in the archives of the National Weather Service, The measurements persist too. 13.4 inches near Grand Coteau, 9.8 inches in Milton, 8 inches in New Orleans. Numbers that should not exist in a region where measurable snow is itself a novelty. Winter Storm Enzo was not supposed to happen. The Gulf Coast was not supposed to experience a blizzard. New Orleans was not supposed to receive more snow than Alaska. But weather does not consult expectations. It follows physics. And in January 2025, the physics aligned to produce something historic, something beautiful, something deadly, and something that may yet prove to be a preview of disruptions still to come. The snow is gone now. The question is whether it will return, and whether the Gulf Coast will be ready if it does.